The moment I saw my truck rolling down the street without me in it, my stomach dropped. For half a second, I thought it had been stolen by professionals. Then I recognized the woman standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, smiling like she'd just won something. That smile told me everything. This wasn't a thief. This was an HOA Karen, and she thought she owned my property. I parked my coffee on the hood of my neighbor's car and jogged toward the street, shouting for the driver to stop. The tow truck slowed, confused, as I waved my registration in the air. The driver leaned out and said a woman from the HOA ordered the tow, claiming the truck was abandoned and in violation. I laughed, because my truck was parked legally in my own driveway. Karen stepped forward and announced that her son needed the truck moved immediately. She claimed he was entitled to it, because I didn't deserve such a vehicle. She said the HOA had authority to confiscate it. I told her calmly that I wasn't even part of her HOA. She didn't care. Authority to her was a feeling, not a fact. When the tow driver refused to continue, she pulled out her phone and dialed the police. Loudly. She wanted witnesses. She wanted control. She wanted me embarrassed. Neighbors peeked through blinds as she paced, telling dispatch I was aggressive, uncooperative, and obstructing HOA enforcement. I stood there silently, letting her talk. Years earlier, I'd learned that people like her expose themselves if you give them enough rope. When the officers arrived, she launched into her story, pointing at my truck like it was evidence of a crime. She demanded I be fined. She demanded the tow continue. She demanded respect. The officer asked for documentation. She waved it off. He asked for proof of HOA jurisdiction. She scoffed. That's when I said one sentence that changed everything. I'd like the state attorney notified. Her smile vanished. What she didn't know was that my truck wasn't just mine. It was tied to an ongoing investigation, one she'd just inserted herself into. And by calling the cops, she hadn't trapped me. She'd invited scrutiny she couldn't survive. The officer's posture changed the instant I mentioned the state attorney. He stopped looking at Karen and looked at me instead, asking calmly why that would be necessary. Karen interrupted, laughing nervously, saying I was trying to sound important. She insisted this was a simple HOA matter and demanded the tow resume immediately. Her confidence was loud, but it was starting to crack. I explained that my truck was part of an active, legal dispute involving improper seizure attempts in nearby communities. I kept my voice steady, not dramatic. The officer nodded and asked Karen again for documentation authorizing the tow. She produced a folded notice with no letterhead, no signatures, and no reference number. It was something she'd clearly typed herself. The tow driver shook his head and stepped back, saying he wouldn't touch the vehicle without clear authorization. That's when Karen's tone shifted. She accused everyone of conspiring against her. She claimed the HOA president was on vacation and unreachable. She said she had verbal authority. The officer reminded her that verbal authority doesn't move property. Karen then doubled down on the real reason. She said her son needed the truck because his car was unreliable, and it wasn't fair that I had something so nice sitting unused. That admission hung in the air. A neighbor audibly gasped. The officer asked her if she was attempting to take private property for personal use. She said it wasn't theft if the HOA approved it. The officer radioed in details, then stepped aside to make a call. When he returned, he asked me if I'd be willing to wait while the state attorney's office was looped in. Karen scoffed, saying that was ridiculous. She told me I was about to regret escalating things. Her voice shook just slightly. 20 minutes later, a second patrol car arrived, then a third. Karen's phone stopped buzzing. Her confidence drained as she realized this wasn't going the way she'd imagined. An officer informed her that making a false report and attempting an unauthorized tow could carry serious consequences. She tried to walk it back, saying it was a misunderstanding. But misunderstandings don't come with demands and lies. When the call from the state attorney finally came through, the officer put it on speaker. And that's when Karen learned that authority doesn't come from shouting the loudest. It comes from the law. The voice on the speakerphone was calm, direct, and completely unimpressed. The assistant state attorney asked the officer to summarize the situation, and as he did, Karen kept trying to interject. Each time, the officer raised a hand, signaling her to stop. For the first time since this started, she was being silenced by someone she couldn't intimidate. When the officer finished, the state attorney asked a single question. Is there any written authorization, filed lien, court order, or verified HOA jurisdiction over the vehicle? The answer was no. Karen opened her mouth to argue, but the attorney didn't wait. She stated clearly that attempting to seize private property without legal authority could constitute theft, and calling police under false pretenses could add another charge. The street went quiet. Neighbors leaned closer. Karen's face turned pale. She tried to explain that she'd been doing this for years, and that everyone knows she ran things. The attorney replied that longevity doesn't legalize misconduct. Then she asked for Karen's full name and role within the HOA. That's when the truth unraveled. Karen wasn't the HOA president. She wasn't even an elected board member anymore. Her term had expired months earlier, and no renewal had been filed. The officer confirmed this through a quick database check. The authority Karen had been wielding was imaginary. The state attorney instructed the officer to document everything. The tow request, the false statements, the personal motive involving her son. She also requested the tow company's records and asked for witness names. Karen tried to leave, saying she felt harassed. The officer told her she needed to stay. Her son arrived shortly after, angry and confused. He demanded to know why his truck replacement wasn't happening. When the officer explained, he lashed out, accusing me of ruining their lives. That outburst didn't help. It was recorded, added to the report, and noted as further evidence of intent. The attorney made it clear this wasn't about punishment in the street. It was about accountability later. She instructed that no arrest be made on scene, but warned Karen that charges were likely. She also advised her to cease all HOA-related actions immediately. As the call ended, Karen looked smaller somehow. The crowd dispersed slowly, buzzing with disbelief. The tow truck drove away empty. My truck sat exactly where it had been all morning. Karen avoided my eyes as she left. Her son followed, silent now. What they didn't realize was that the real consequences were just beginning. Paper trails don't disappear. And when the state starts pulling threads, entire schemes come apart. By calling the cops, Karen thought she'd assert power. Instead, she invited the one authority she couldn't bully. And once that door opened, it wasn't closing quietly. The fallout didn't take long. 2 days later, official letters arrived across the neighborhood, stamped and unmistakably serious. The state attorney's office had opened a formal inquiry into unauthorized HOA, enforcement, improper towing practices, and misuse of authority. Karen's name appeared repeatedly, not as a complainant, but as the subject. The woman who once patrolled the street, like a sheriff, suddenly stopped, leaving her house. I was contacted again, this time for a sworn statement. I sat in a quiet office and walked through everything from the moment I saw my truck move to the instant the speakerphone went silent. The investigator listened carefully, occasionally nodding, occasionally asking for clarification. When I finished, she thanked me and said something that stuck with me. This isn't the first time we've heard her name. As records were pulled, the picture got uglier. Karen had authorized multiple tows without proper notice. She'd issued fines that weren't in the bylaws. In several cases, residents paid simply to avoid confrontation. One family had even sold their car after repeated threats. Each action alone looked small. Together they formed a pattern. The most damaging detail involved her son. Investigators uncovered messages where Karen promised him access to vehicles she deemed underused. She framed it as HOA efficiency. In reality, it was favoritism wrapped in fake authority. My truck wasn't a one-time target. It was just the first time someone pushed back with witnesses and paperwork. The HOA board moved quickly once lawyers got involved. An emergency meeting was called, and Karen was officially removed from any role, past or present. A notice went out clarifying that she had no authority to enforce anything. Refunds were discussed. Audits were scheduled. The board's tone was apologetic, almost panicked. Karen tried to regain control by sending emails accusing residents of betrayal. Those messages were forwarded directly to investigators. Each one strengthened the case against her. Silence would have helped her. She couldn't manage it. Meanwhile, her son stopped showing up around the neighborhood. Rumors spread that his employer had questions after learning about the incident. Whether true or not, the arrogance he displayed vanished overnight. One evening, a neighbor knocked on my door with a folder of documents. Inside were notices Karen had issued over the years. All questionable, all unsigned. I didn't know what to do, he said. Until now. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about my truck anymore. It was about a system that relied on people staying quiet. The moment someone spoke up, it collapsed under its own weight. And the final chapter is where the consequences become official. And Karen learns exactly what happens when imagined power meets real law. The official decision came on a Monday morning, delivered in an envelope thicker than anything I'd ever received from the government. The state attorney's office had completed its review, and the findings were blunt. Karen's actions were ruled deliberate, unauthorized, and self-serving. What she'd framed as HOA enforcement was legally classified as attempted theft, false reporting, and abuse of position. The language left no room for interpretation. Charges were filed shortly after. Karen wasn't led away in handcuffs on the street, but the consequences were real and unavoidable. She faced court dates, fines, and a permanent record that would follow her far longer than her imagined authority ever had. Her son was named in the report as a beneficiary of the attempted theft, though no charges were filed against him due to lack of direct action. That distinction mattered. It meant the blame sat squarely where it belonged. The HOA entered a restitution phase. Improper fines were refunded. Towing contracts were terminated. New safeguards were written into the bylaws, including third-party oversight and strict documentation requirements. For the first time since I'd moved there, HOA notices came with explanations instead of threats. Karen stopped appearing entirely. Her house went quiet. The emails stopped. The rumors faded. When her name came up, it was no longer spoken with fear, but with disbelief that she'd gotten away with so much for so long. Power, it turned out, had been sustained by silence, not legitimacy. As for my truck, it never moved again without my consent. But it became more than a vehicle to me. It became a reminder of how quickly things change when someone refuses to be intimidated. All I'd done was ask for documentation and involve the proper authority. Everything else unraveled on its own. Neighbors I barely knew before now waved, stopped to talk, shared stories. There was a sense of relief in the air, like a pressure valve finally released. One person standing up had given others permission to do the same. Looking back, the irony still makes me shake my head. Karen had called the police to assert control, convinced she'd cornered me. Instead, she'd called the one system that doesn't care about titles, volume, or entitlement. The law doesn't negotiate with confidence. It responds to facts. If there's a lesson here, it's simple. Authority isn't something you declare. It's something that exists only when it's backed by reality. The moment Karen crossed that line, everything she'd built collapsed. And all it took was one phone call she thought would protect her.